Hello and very welcome everyone to Regio and today's program, webinar on a very timely topic, Leave No One Behind, policies to support a just green transition in the Nordic countries. We're very happy because we have more than 200 signups today, and we hope that many of you are joining us live. Otherwise, we'll of course record this event and share recording and presentations, reports, etc. after the event tomorrow. So anyway, my name is Åsa Ström Hildestrand and I'm Head of Communications here at Regio, and I'm very pleased to be your moderator today. And the aim of this webinar is to discuss what do we actually mean by a just green transition, and how do climate mitigation policies affect people's lives, depending on age, region, work situation, etc. And which are the blind spots of Nordic climate policies? Those are some of the key questions to discuss today. As a starting point, we will release 2 new reports or discussion papers today. It's a literature review on green transition, key concepts, etc. And also a knowledge overview on the social impacts of climate policies. So I have colleagues with me here today to present these reports, but after that, we have invited different stakeholders to comment on the reports from their different perspectives. We have national policymakers and representatives from labor market and civil society. So we'll come back to you soon. Last but not least, we of course want to hear from you in the audience as well. So please join the Zoom chat, which will be moderated by some other colleagues of mine. Post your questions there for the panel discussion, which will come up a bit later in the program. But also please post any links or other projects you're working on, other things that you think we should all be aware of on the topic just green transition. And again, we'll record the program today and we'll share the recording, presentations, etc. tomorrow. All right, let's get started, officially started. And for the opening remarks, we are very pleased to have Ásta Bjarnadóttir with us from Iceland. She works in the Prime Minister's office and happens to be the chair of the NJUST steering group. And it's the NJUST project that has been working on this topic here at Regio for a while. So Ásta, we're so happy to have you with us. Maybe you could tell us a bit more why you think just green transition is important and timely. Very welcome to the program, Ásta.
Thank you very much. Can you actually hear me? This is my first sound check. I had some problems before, but I'm happy that they were solved in time.
Yes, looks good. Like the poster on your wall as well.
Now. So hello everyone, I'm honored to have been given an opportunity to open this important event on policies to support a just green transition in the Nordics. As has already been mentioned, my name is Ásta Bjarnadóttir and I work on sustainable development and policy coordination at the Prime Minister's office in Iceland. And I also represent Iceland in the Nordic Expert Group for Sustainable Development, and I'm currently the chairperson of the project steering group for the NJUST project. Now, why is a just green transition important and timely? Well, as the name of this event highlights, leaving no one behind is essentially what we're discussing here today. That motto is, as you know, the red thread running through the entire 2030 agenda and is pivotal to its success. Still, the problem is that although everyone agrees on its importance, we're not seeing it enough in action, even though we are already witnessing the disproportionate effects of climate change and the current economic crisis on different social groups around the world. But what about the effects of the climate mitigation policies themselves, the government's plans and actions? Are they socially sensitive? And if not, how do we intertwine the two? Reaching sustainable societies through a fair and equal green transition is a very complicated policy issue in practice, as it requires a horizontal approach in a vertical and siloed governmental systems. To implement the vision of the Nordic region to be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world for 2030, the Nordic Council of Ministers aims to tackle those structural challenges by focusing on interdisciplinary perspectives and increase involvement of civil society, whereby sustainable development, gender equality, children's rights and youth perspectives are mainstreamed throughout all activities. That's a good start structure-wise, but for a truly just green transition in the Nordic region, we also need the right data and research to inform and underpin government action. And the work we'll be discussing today brings us one very important step closer to that. In the public discourse, climate change is understandably in focus. More information is available on how climate change impacts on our environment, and the awareness is increasing. We see climate civil movements rising across the world as we witness the first stages of climate change, of changing climate. But less attention is paid on the overall transition that needs to take place and how the much needed and radical environmental action will affect the economic and social elements. Thus, not enough focus is put on the synergies and the potential trade-offs between those policy areas. Luckily, as stated in one of today's reports, the literature agrees that climate change and the social policies can go hand in hand, and climate policies can contribute to generate social benefits beyond job creation and economic benefit. But they can also unintentionally negatively affect certain groups in our society if the social aspect is ignored. In Iceland, for example, we have relatively high income equality, but the fast-growing changes in the job market with a focus on green solutions and technological changes has the potential to disrupt that equilibrium if the government doesn't provide support for the groups that are vulnerable to those changes. Otherwise, as one of the reports launched today highlights, we run the risk of social segregation and feelings of being left behind, posing a significant barrier to the effective implementation of climate policies. We are at a pivotal point in the fight against climate change, and we need to make sure that a green transition doesn't increase the social divide, but rather works towards more social cohesion, both locally and globally. To this end, in Iceland, we are currently forming a new platform within the Prime Minister's office that will coordinate all governmental efforts to support sustainable development, a just green transition, and the well-being economy. Its role will be to make sure that all policies are in line with those three objectives, and that the public and all major stakeholders are heard and informed. Due to these changes, the topic up for discussion today and the NJUST project is especially relevant to us, as it directly informs the policy work we have ahead of us. I look forward to our discussions and hope you all enjoyed today's event and leave feeling inspired to work towards a just green transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ásta, and really interesting to hear about your efforts in Iceland and really trying to walk the talk here. And I'm sure we'll hear more from you a little bit later in the commentary part of the program. So thank you very much. All right, now I also am very pleased to present one of my colleagues here at Regio, Senior Research Fellow Anna Lundgren. You are the project manager of this NJUST project that is actually the core of the work here. So tell us a little bit more about the project and why it's important.
Thank you so much, Åsa, for this introduction, and thanks also to Ásta for these welcoming words to the seminar that we have today to present the first results of this NJUST project that we are running at Regio. There isn't a day without reading in the papers about the energy crisis that is very current topic at the moment, or about climate change effects that we see around the world. And that is also where these Nordic Council of Ministers projects on the green transition comes in, to learn more about the impact of the green transition. And the green transition is here and the climate change is here. So it is not a question if we should work with these issues, but how we can work with these issues. And in this particular project, the NJUST Green Transition Project, we focus on the perceptions of the green transition and climate policies, how these are perceived among people in different regions and in different social groups across the Nordic region. We also have a special focus on what we call the potentially vulnerable groups. Those are, for example, the unemployed, those at risk of unemployment, older adults, children, and persons with disabilities. What are the impact on these groups? And how, not least, can we create policies that take this into account and policies for a just green transition? And in the Not Just Green Transition project, just to give a brief note, this is a project running 2021 to 2024. And the full title of the project is Examining the Path Towards a Socially Just Green Transition in the Nordic Region, with the acronym NJUST. And I think I have a second slide, please. Thank you. And this is, as I mentioned, this is a cross-sectoral project that has been both initiated and funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. We have Ásta with us here, who is the chairperson of the steering group, but the steering group also consists of other representatives from the different Nordic Council of Ministers. We also have with us the Nordic Expert Group for Sustainable Development. We have a collaboration with stakeholders, for instance, the Nordic Welfare Center, the Nordic Civil Society Network, and also the Council for the Nordic Trade Unions, which will also participate later today in the panel to share some of their reflections on our work. And then Regio is responsible for the implementation of the project. And as mentioned here, the aim is to contribute to a just green transition in the Nordic region. And we want to do this by producing and sharing knowledge. And this is the first event that we're having within the project, where we present 2 reports. And our analysis, as also mentioned, is focusing on impacts on target groups. And we will also in the project identify policies to mitigate negative or potentially negative effects of the climate policies. And questions we ask within this project are, for example, how do people perceive the green transition and climate policies? What are the impacts on those target groups? And how can a just green transition actually be achieved? And some of the answers to these questions we will hear more about today as we present those 2 first reports. And we are a number of colleagues from Nordic working on this project. So I have several colleagues here with me that will take part in today's event and present the results. So thank you, Åsa.
Great, Anna. Good to have that background. And now let's present one of those colleagues. We have Senior Research Fellow Carlos Tapia, and you are one of the authors behind these 2 reports. So very welcome, Carlos. And yeah, you'll enlighten us a bit more about the social impacts of these climate mitigation policies. So please, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And sorry, one technical note. Apparently we do have a problem with the chat function, which is very bad since I asked you all to engage. And we are trying to solve this issue and maybe find a workaround for those of you who want to pose questions to the panel discussion later on. But anyway, we're trying to solve this. All right, Carlos, please.
Thank you. Just try to adjust the presentation. Okay, so thank you everyone. Thanks also for the introduction. My name is Carlos Tapia, and I'm working here in Regio as Senior Research Fellow since 2020. Over the last 10 years, I've been doing research on topics like climate adaptation, green economy, and circular economy in different contexts, regions, and cities. As Anna very well explained before, today we'll be presenting some initial findings from our NJUST project, which focuses on the social impacts of climate mitigation policies on vulnerable groups in the Nordic region. So what is a just green transition? Before jumping into concepts, it is worthwhile putting the notion in historical perspective. The expression just transition was coined by the International Labour Union movement in the 1990s. The notion is rooted on the experiences of the American workers affected by processes of industrial change in the American Rust Belt and the Appalachian region during the 1970s and 1980s. The notion was mainstreamed later into international policy through the Paris Agreement of 2015. Over time, the just transition concept has been acquiring a more strategic and preventive nature, as opposed to its initial more corrective and compensatory vocation. So the just green transition is enabled by three conceptual building blocks, namely social justice, just, environmental sustainability, green, and social technical change, transition. The concept of a social justice lays at its core. A green transition that leaves no one behind requires that concepts like distributional justice, recognitional justice, procedural, spatial, and environmental justice, among others, are considered and enabled by socially conscious climate policies. So what is required to enable a just green transition in the Nordics? In our view, a just green transition involves four far-reaching socio-technical changes that lead us towards a climate-neutral economy that ensures social justice and preserves biodiversity. So based on the previous definition of a just green transition, our research aims at enlarging the knowledge base on its potential impacts on individuals and the so-called target groups that include unemployed and people at risk of unemployment, children, older adults, and people with disabilities, focusing, of course, in the Nordic region. To fulfill those goals, our research provides an overview of the decarbonization processes in the Nordics, maps climate policies and climate targets in different countries and self-governing territories in the region, and also compiles information on the potential socioeconomic effects of climate mitigation policies on the target groups. So what are the Nordic climate challenges and responses? You don't see my slides. Oh, sorry. I will try to fix this. I was just showing or trying to show the slides, but there was an issue here. Let's go back to the screen sharing function and try to enable that again. Is that working now? Good. Sorry about that. So I was talking about, you will have the slides anyway after the presentation, so no worries about that. Shouldn't be a big problem. That you missed a few initial conceptual slides. The plots that you see on the screen show the evolution of the greenhouse gas emissions in the Nordic countries by sector. The plots cover territorial emissions from all the major economic sectors, excluding land use. However, the emissions embedded on exports, like crude oil, and imports, manufactured goods, consumption goods, are not included. Also, the scale of each plot is different. Plots cannot be compared side by side. This being said, the diagrams clearly show how the Nordic countries have different decarbonization trajectories that link back to diverse economic structures and energy mixes. Territorial greenhouse gas emissions are declining in most countries. The largest progress has been done in fuel combustion sector, energy industries in particular, but challenges still remain in sectors like process industries, oil and chemistry, chemical sector, cement, steel making, and others, including agriculture and transport. So based on the different challenges, it comes as no surprise that the countries and territories have different climate ambitions. The climate goals differ in terms of how progress is expressed and when the milestones are set. Some countries, like Iceland and Finland, aim at carbon neutrality, which implies striking a balance between the emissions of the carbon dioxide and its removal through carbon sinks and offsets. Other countries, like Denmark and Sweden, ambition to become climate neutral, which refers to reaching a balance between total greenhouse gas emissions, not only carbon dioxide, and carbon sinks. Norway has a somehow more modest ambition to become a low-emission society by 2050. And also the self-governing territories have a specific climate change climate mitigation goals and energy targets. All these goals are materialized in a long list of instruments, including regulations and standards, like, for example, energy efficiency requirements for buildings, taxes and subsidies like diesel taxes, travel permits such as the emission allowances that the companies get in the European trading system, and also voluntary measures taken by citizens and companies like reducing meat consumption, for example. And of course, all of the Nordic countries are committed to the international policy framework for climate. This includes the major international agreements under the UN umbrella, like the Paris Agreement, but also, and in particular, the EU Climate and Energy Policy Framework and its instruments. So, which are the social impacts of the climate policies on our target groups? The literature does not focus specifically on unemployed persons and those at risk of unemployment to start with this target group, but rather on the overall labor market effects of the green and climate transitions. A transition to a low carbon economy will imply the creation of new jobs in environmentally friendly production systems, whereas other jobs and sectors will be at risk in sectors with limited capacity to adapt. Particularly exposed sectors in the Nordic context include oil extraction in Norway, animal agriculture in Denmark, peat production in Finland, and the process industry across the Nordics. That is pulp manufacturing, cement manufacturing, oil refining, for example. But at the same time, employment potentials in the Nordic green economy seem large, thanks to natural assets, innovation capacity, and long-standing tradition of social cooperation. It is generally accepted that the net long-term effects of climate transitions will be positive in terms of number of jobs created. So all sectors will be affected a way or another, but labor market effects will be unevenly distributed across the Nordic region's sectors and occupations. This will lead to a diversity of social impacts. Transitions might be beneficial for some people, will be beneficial for some people actually, and regions, for example, white collars, male-dominated sectors, and urban households seem to be those mostly benefited, but could also be detrimental for others, blue collars, women-dominated sectors, rural households, etc. So social acceptability of climate policies might be compromised by the job-killing arguments, which seem to prevail still among a share of the Nordic public opinion. This is a pro-economic or pro-economy narrative in the political discourse. The social impacts of climate policies beyond jobs are little studied. Long-term effects of Nordic green transitions are still uncertain when it comes to factors such as gender, ethnicity, age, geography, sexuality, indigenous status, or disabilities. The emphasis on the co-benefits of climate mitigation policies seems to be at the core of this literature. So, for example, climate policies are assumed to have a positive effect on children's health through the reduction of atmospheric pollution. However, climate policies can affect children's well-being indirectly as well. So, for example, through their household status and parents' working conditions. The green energy transitions may also have mixed consequences for children in the global south. These impacts are materialized through international supply chains. So, for example, child labor in mining or e-waste recycling. According to the reviewed literature, children still lack recognition as an important stakeholder in climate policies. This undermines climate policy action and challenges the credibility of climate policies themselves. If energy prices keep rising, older adults in low-income households are expected to experience challenges in keeping their homes at an adequate temperature during winter season. Similarly, increasing energy costs might limit the ability of older adults to travel for leisure or even to meet basic needs such as healthcare. This can be particularly problematic in Nordic rural areas where a higher share of older people reside. In these areas, home heating requirements are higher and public transport is less accessible in general, so fuel costs can have a greater impact on this group. Other older adults bear a moral responsibility and agree generally to commit to contribute to the climate transition. However, they are generally excluded from climate debates, even more so than children. Disabled households are more sensitive to price increases of basic commodities. In particular, the group is more likely to experience energy poverty. some environmental and climate policies neglect the specific needs of the people in this group, and hence such policies might have a disproportional effect on them, like for example illustrated by the bans of single-use plastics. This lack of awareness among policymakers on the specific needs of people with disabilities result in policies that lack coordination with health and other sectoral policies. So what are our takeaways from this compilation? In general, the literature shows that the intensity of social impacts depends on people's capacity to cope, adapt, and recover from external shocks. These qualities depend on a combination of individual characteristics like ethnicity, sex, age, health status, etc., and also socioeconomic aspects such as income levels, skills, education attainment, etc. As a consequence, distributional impacts might be important. Poorer households could be comparatively more affected by increasing energy costs, for example, than high-income households. In general, social impacts are asymmetric, leading to disproportional effects on social groups, regions, etc., as we have explained or illustrated before with examples on urban versus rural households. Also, the indirect impacts can be important, like high energy costs and lack of public transport, leading to or reducing accessibility to basic services in rural areas. Finally, impacts can be transferred to other sectors or geographies through international trade. So here comes some policy messages from this preliminary compilation or analysis that we have done in the project. First of all, we think that awareness on the specific needs of vulnerable social groups is key to enable social justice and a fair transition. Limited participation, access to knowledge, resources, and services result in policies that reinforce existing social, economic, and institutional discrimination of some people, with limited capacity to influence the climate agenda. So engagement and awareness are key to reinforce coordination of climate policies with other sectoral and social policies. So this would be our final take on the analysis that we have done. Change is unavoidable and necessary. At the same time, we should get prepared. The picture that you see there is a snapshot of Stockholm's Kungsgatan Street. The photo was taken on Sunday, September the 3rd of 1967. It is the first morning after Sweden changed from driving on the left side to driving on the right side. Changes triggered by this small overall policy decision included new traffic regulations and planning rules, new infrastructures, road designs, traffic signs, traffic lights, new routes for public transport, new industrial processes as well, from vehicle design to manufacturing, modified traffic education materials and driving lessons, and in particular, it changed skills and behavior among the population, both drivers and pedestrians, from looking to your left side the other way around, from looking to the right side to the left side when crossing the street. So all this means that small decisions have a great power to lever and unleash change. And it is a very illustrative example of how this systemic change can be implemented in a planned way. Well, that wouldn't be what the picture suggests anyway. So thank you, Åsa, and thank you, colleagues, for the time.
Yes, thank you, Carlos. I think before you leave here, I'm actually a bit curious to hear. I think you summarized this very, very well in this picture, that change is going to happen and we need to embrace change, but also try and see all the different aspects and consequences and mitigate those as you suggested. But I'm curious to know, when you did all this reviewing of the current research, was there anything that you found most striking or surprising when you did this analysis?
The probably lack of awareness that still today exists on the impact of the social impacts of climate policies. There's little research done on this topic. More needs to be done, and more evidence needs to be collected in order to be able to put together robust policies. I would say that is the most striking aspect in the research that we have done.
Okay, and then it's very good that this project will continue another while, so you'll have a chance to dig deeper into to these topics as well. Thanks again, Carlos Tapia, for this presentation. And now let's turn to two guests on screen here to get some comments from the national policy level. And for that, we have invited, to begin with, Heta-Elena Heiskanen from the Ministry of Environment in Finland. Very welcome to the program, and you are also part of the NJUST project steering group, I should add. Also, on a technical note, before I leave the screen to you here, I also wanted to say that since apparently the chat function is disabled for some because of recent updates in the Zoom program, but we do see that the Q&A function still works. So please pose your questions in the Q&A function in this Zoom window. I hope you see it at the bottom bar there on your screens. All right, but anyways, Heta-Elena, please, what are your comments to these presentations? And please tell us a little bit about the Finnish approach to address just.
Yes, thank you so much. So regards from Ministry of Environment from Finland, I work in the climate unit, and I also work closely with the climate change panel. I think this is a very topical question that has arisen, especially during the past 4 years' time in Finland. In the beginning of this current government, we established a new roundtable for climate policy. And I think this is one of the so-called new instruments for just transition in Finland. And this high-level roundtable of 20 persons is led by the Prime Minister, which is emphasizing the high status of the group. And the group includes different kind of stakeholders from industries, but also young people, municipalities, researchers, labor unions, different kind of actors from the society. And this group has been meeting in the past a couple of years' time, several times a year, to discuss the very current climate plans we have from the point of view of acceptability, social justice, and the themes that have been talked about today. And one thing that I would like to take up here is that there's 2 young persons among these 20 persons, because we thought that it's not enough to have this one person for a kind of a quota young person, but to have 2. And the other one is actually a vice chair of the group to emphasize the leadership of young people in these issues in Finland. Also, we have indigenous people's representation in the group. So I think this is one model that is new development and has been showing that we have to deepen the dialogue between the stakeholders and policymakers. Mm-hmm. But in addition, I think these are very topical issues because we are facing more and more very concrete policy measures that the citizens are seeing in their daily lives too. So to ensure that people are, supporting the climate policy, we need to engage a strong dialogue. And I think that the new groups that we've been starting to involve more than before have included happily those groups that you also have identified. We've been having a lot of different kind of youth and youth engagements, also including children, including also, for instance, children from Sami community or children from different parts of Finland. Also, we've been involving more and more indigenous peoples, and I'm really glad to tell you that in our new Climate Act, we actually established a new group for Sami people, indigenous people in Finland, and researchers. So next year, we're going to have this new Sami Climate Council that is going to create dialogue between the traditional knowledge holders, Sami people, and researchers. And these 2 groups will together provide a new kind of information basis for policymakers. And I think this is one of the new developments that I'm really proud to tell from Finland, and also encourage other Nordic countries to think about different kind of models to enable dialogue between the indigenous peoples, for instance. And then
I was just going to ask if maybe you could extend the invitation to representatives from the other Nordic countries there, especially, I mean, those who also have Sami population. I think they would find that very interesting to at least listen in. So very interesting initiative. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sure. And then I would take also the elderly people and disabled people here in the discussion, because apparently these have been the groups, as you identified, that have not been involved in so much in the dialogue, but we have been starting to build the dialogue between these groups from last year on, and we're going to have next time a dialogue between elderly people and disabled people in a couple of weeks' time in relation to adaptation issues. And in adaptation, these groups are in particularly vulnerable in relation to the long heat waves, for example, but also some other things. So I think this is very important. And when I had this first dialogue last year with the Council of Disabled People and councils of elderly people, in Finland we have municipality level councils for these groups of people, but we have not been thinking of starting the dialogue with these councils before last year. So I asked them, have they had any dialogue between the municipality authorities in relation to climate change? And they told me that no, they have not. So apparently we have had these really good democratic structures, and now it has become this new area where we realized that actually we could use these democratic structures to have dialogue in relation to just transition. And I think this is very promising development that is now taking place, at least with 2 different ministries in Finland in relation to climate policy. So I think these are, I hope, promising and inspiring news also for others.
I would assume that. It's interesting though with the local level perspective as well, and I would have assumed that it could be connected to the local level work with Agenda 2030 as well. And I know that a lot of Finnish municipalities are really front runners there, so maybe that's also a next development to sort of merge these 2 debates or agendas. Super interesting. Anything else that you wanted to add at this point?
Well, I think there was questions on the Climate Act that we have, and I was touching it slightly, but maybe I could open up it a little bit more, because traditionally we've been doing participation processes for legislation for the stakeholders that are already active on the field, and it can be that it's relatively limited amount of actors that are then involved. But with the Climate Act process, we defined in the beginning of the process that we're going to ensure strong participation for young people and for Sami people. And this was kind of a guiding principle throughout the process. And we had the idea that we're trying to enable participation also for those young people who are not active already. So we were, for example, doing research cooperation with a big all youth project that is developing digital tools for online participation for young people, and they helped us to do some consultations in schools. And when we go to schools and we do these participation processes there, then we are usually able to get a broader spectrum of people that would not otherwise in their free time participate. And this is something that I would highly encourage also others in Nordic countries to think about, how to not enable just participation for those who are very active ones, but also those who might not know how to participate, because this is very important from the democratic kind of skills perspective. I would say that people would have this feeling of capacity to participate. this.
All right, thank you. I think that's also a very good transfer or bridge over to Iceland and our colleague Ásta Bjarnadóttir, because you're with us again. And I know that youth engagement and through schools is high on the agenda in Iceland as well, certain places. But Heta, Elena, you will stay on as well for the panel discussion that will follow soon. All right, but now over to Iceland then, Ásta. We're happy to hear a few comments from your end as well about the reports and a little bit more about your work with just green transition in Iceland. Sorry, I think you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, we still keep
No
doing
worries.
that.
I'll just get a glass of water as well.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very inspired listening to Heta Elena. We obviously think that what they're doing in Finland is very inspiring, and we're trying to form, like I said before in my introductory comments, trying to form a new platform that's more maybe a little bit in line with what they're doing, and trying to learn from all the other Nordic countries, because this is what, especially within our Nordic expert group on sustainable development, we find that we have a very good knowledge sharing going on there. And I think that our next step and what we're trying to form now will help us in this perspective. And obviously this the just green transition is one of the things that we should be focusing on through this platform, and all the ideas that we got from Heta Elena, we will take on board. And obviously, with the public consultations and with targeting groups that we know will face some challenges in response to, different policy areas, and the idea of trying to reach out to people that are not already trying to or not already involved in this public discourse. I think that is a very good point. That's the people that we need to target, and we need to get involved. And but when it comes to the report, and I would just like to thank for an excellent presentation and that one. There were obviously, I think, I welcome this report so much. I think it's a very good one. I think it's enlightening on this topic, because there's, like he said, not a lot of research, or not enough at this point, and not a lot of material on this for us to move forward. Even though we have a general consensus on what we're dealing with here, we need more research. And what I'm really interested in, especially, is the data gathering that we need to be more focused on. We need more disaggregated data to lead our policy making, and I think that's something.
You mean data on the different impacts on different social groups, or what kind of data?
Yes, that's something that we've been trying to focus on through sustainable development with the 2030 agenda, and it's been, I think I can say, a universal problem, trying to get access to data that sort of tells us more about different groups of society. We're still looking a lot on sort of average numbers on a national level, and we need to disaggregate them to different types of groups. For different types of problems. It's not always the same groups that we need to be focusing on. So we need a lot more work and focus on that area. And I think that the work on the NJUST group will really help us in that respect. And this research that we now, and the report that we now have, really helps us to focus in that area. And
do you see already that there is a specific target group that you will want to focus on in Iceland for the coming year or so? Are you going to focus on youth, for example, or is there any other social group that you have already identified that you will target more than others in terms of understanding impacts and mitigating impacts?
Well, youth has been a focus group of ours for quite some time. And I think that that's something that the Nordic countries can agree on, that we've been trying to involve them more in the last few years in policymaking. I mean, we have obviously been mindful of this issue here in Iceland. We have a policy on adaptation to climate change, but I feel like this new way of thinking about it, that it's not just adaptation to the climate change itself, it's that we need to be looking at the policies themselves, what effect they might have. I think it's not completely different, but it's a new perspective to take. And I think that's a really, really good one. We need to focus more on maybe unintended consequences on what we're trying to do at this point. And I think that that's where the structural issues are really sort of holding us back, because if we're like we still are, we're always policy works happens quite a lot still in silos, and that's when we're not mindful enough of other elements having an impact. So I think that projects like these that run horizontally through different types of areas of our policymaking, they help us to sort of, for one, speak to different specialists in different fields more, and help us to sort of gain a new perspective on our work.
Maybe if we should end on a positive note here, as Carlos mentioned, overall, it does seem like there will be a positive outcome on the labor market with the green transition. We're going to create a lot of new jobs as well and replacing old ones. Where do you see Iceland in that? Do you see also a good potential here, or in any specific sectors in Iceland when it comes to the green transition benefits?
Of course, yes. I think I see great potentials for us in Iceland when it comes to these changes, especially the technological ones. We're obviously a small nation that could use technological change to our benefits. I'm not the expert on this topic, so I won't go too far into it. But obviously, yes, there's just like you said, so we can end on a positive note. There's obviously great opportunities there, but we just, yeah, like the discussion here today centers around, we need to be mindful of different aspects of those changes.
Thank you so much, Ásta, for those wise comments, and for both of you for providing hope and sharing your latest measures to address this issue. And I'm also, of course, from my Nordic perspective, I'm very happy to hear that you see the value of Nordic collaboration and peer-to-peer learning here. And that's what this project is all about as well. Great. Now, before we have the panel discussion, we'll actually also get to hear from some of these target groups or special groups on the labor market, youth, elderly, etc., to hear from their perspective how they foresee a just green transition, or how they're working to achieve that. So with us today, we have the Council of Nordic Trade Unions, we have the Confederation of Finnish Industries, and we have the Nordic Youth Council. We were also supposed to have a member here from the Nordic Pensioners Organization, but unfortunately they had to decline with a very short notice. But we'll try to include the senior perspective into this discussion as well, as much as possible. So maybe we could start with Magnus Gisler. Are you with us? Yes, you are.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Very welcome to the program, Magnus. So you're the Secretary General of the Council of Nordic Trade Unions. So just, please provide a little bit of background and also your comments to this these new reports and the topic.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to start off by thanking for being able to take part in this discussion, and also to Regio for having this important project on just transition and how to get all involved and that we don't leave anyone behind in the necessary green just transition. Just some facts of NFS, the Council of Nordic Trade Unions, before I go on. Our member organizations are the national trade union confederations in the Nordic countries, including also Faroe Island and Greenland. We have 15 member organizations covering all sectors, both blue collar, white collar, and academic organizations. And through our 15 member organizations, we represent more than 8.5 million organized employees in the Nordic countries and on the joint Nordic labor market. So we work quite a lot in the overall perspective. And of course, one of the important questions, one of the focus areas is just transition and how the climate affect the labor market. That's one of the most essential things we are working with for the time being. So this is really important and good that we can have this discussion concerning this. I would like to give a thanks to Carlos Tapia also for a very good and interesting presentation. I think there were a lot of important conclusions and challenges put forward there. I could also start by quoting the General Secretary, to make it easy and maybe a little bit blunt and straightforward, to quote General Secretary Sharon Burrow of the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, by saying that there are no jobs on a dead planet. I think that makes it very clear what this is about. We don't have any choice. We need to tackle the challenges. We need to do it with social protection. We need to do it in a fair way. And change is ongoing. It's inevitable. And we are coping with the change all the time. We have done it before. We do it now, and we have to do it in the future. And I think also that this is one of the strengths and competitive advantages we have in the Nordics together, and I will come back to that. I also would like to underline that many of the things that Carlos put forward is also questions concerning that it is not equality in all the perspectives. It's much about what resources we have to tackle the things. And I think it's important to put focus on that in the process and in the change. And what was very well put forward in the report is that there are a lot of vulnerable groups that to a very high degree are affected by the process and the change. And I think it's really important to take that into account and also focus on questions like poverty and how we can create as much security for everyone when we go through the process and change. And I would also like to underline the importance of more research and projects and really to investigate how the climate policies put forward affects all people in the society, both labor market, of course, but also other groups in the society. So I think that is really key to focus on. I also think that it is important to underline that climate policy have for a long time, and naturally, of course, been an issue with focus on environmental discussions and concerns, mainly within the field of interest for ministers of environment and environmental sectors of our societies. And climate policy, as we know, will, however, and is already triggering and driving structural change. This is, of course, the purpose of climate policies, and we have to mitigate emissions of greenhouse gases. A lot of the debate have focused on consumption and behavioral change, but equally essential, how will climate policy affect production and all the employees in various industries and sectors of the labor market? Some more emission heavy than others. Who will win and who will lose? And how can we help those that risk their livelihoods? Key questions to focus on are what financial, industrial, and labor market policies needed to handle and mitigate social costs, such as inequalities and unemployment. And how can we at the same time, and I think that is also important to highlight, increase our competitiveness? These and many more are questions that need answers in a just green transition, and I'm convinced that the holistic approach would help us with that. In the Nordic trade union movement, we are confident that the Nordic model can help us, not only with a holistic approach, but also as a means to trigger structure change and build consensus for it to really happen. Because, as I said earlier, we don't have any choice. We therefore need both bi- and tri-part discussions and of course also negotiated collective agreements, developed collective agreements between the social partners in relation to what already exists today that handle issues such as redundancies, up and reskilling, unemployment insurance, investments, and so on, with developed regulations and solutions for the future, for the green future. And here I think the Nordic Council of Ministers has a great opportunity to arrange for discussions between themselves, trade unions, and employers. This is what we call the Nordic model. And this would at the same time be something very positive, something that will provide with good examples, not only for other countries in the world, but also for us in the Nordic countries and for our own joint development to handle a green just transition.
Great, thank you so much, Magnus. I actually have to put a little break here because we also want time for questions and answers and dialogue in the panel discussion. But thank you for those insightful points, and we are happy to see that we have a mandate to continue with this Nordic collaboration and strengthen the Nordic model in this regard as well. And we'll come back to that later in this project as well. But thank you very much, Magnus. And now let's hear from the other side, so to speak. Although, of course, we don't want to be polarizing here in the Nordics. But Markus Eimele, you are with us and you represent the industry perspective from the Confederation of Finnish Industries. And I'm sure that you also have a Nordic collaboration association among your industry associations. But please tell us a little bit more about your perspective on the just green transition and how you're seeking to contribute to this.
Yes, thank you very much. Do you hear what I'm saying?
I do, very well, actually.
Very good. Maybe first a couple of words about Confederation of Finnish Industries. We are the biggest central employer organization in Finland, and we have about 15,000 member companies and about 900,000 employees working in our member companies. I myself am in charge of labor law and industrial relations, so my point of view is first and foremost how the green transition affects the labor markets. Now, as we have heard here already, green transition leads to substantial changes in economy, in labor market. New companies are going to be created, perhaps even new branches of industry. That is, of course, a very positive thing. On the other hand, green transition is going to mean that some companies are going to go bankrupt or close down or reduce activities. Maybe even some branches of industry are going to be in big trouble, like, for example, Mr. Carlos Tapia told in his very good presentation. Now, it's important. One of my main points is that it's important that we do not try to slow down this change, but actually speed it up. accelerate it. In fact, a while ago, the biggest Finnish employer organizations and trade unions, the leaders of these organizations, sent a joint letter to the European Union stressing the importance to speed up the green transition. It's a positive thing. We all agree in the sense like Magnus Gisler mentioned, that we do work together quite well, the employer organizations and trade unions in Nordic countries. Now, we must realize that in practice, this means that a lot of jobs are probably going to disappear, which in turn means that a lot of employees are going to be made redundant. Now, often, especially previously, when a company is informing about its intention to make a lot of people, employees, redundant, a public debate begins how to avoid this. Maybe some subsidies to the companies, maybe some legal obstacles. How can we prevent this losing jobs? This is, of course, understandable, but it is counterproductive because we do not want to slow down the change. We want to accelerate it. Now, okay, we are talking about just transition here. My message is not to just let's just kick everyone out and be happy about it. Of course, we have to. We can't let the employees to be unprotected. They definitely need support, but not by maintaining the jobs that are going to that are not viable, that are going to go away anyway. So what shall we do? First thing that comes to mind is probably unemployment benefits. Yes, very important, necessary, definitely, for those employees affected to be able to support themselves and possibly other family members. However, we must not fall into kind of an unemployment benefit trap. By unemployment benefit trap, I mean a situation where the unemployment benefit gives incentive to just stay unemployed if the benefit is good enough. So we have to kind of like try to find a solution to get those people to new jobs, which is obviously re-education and give enough incentives to find the balance between enough support and then enough incentive to re-educate and to find a new job. It's good for those employees. I think it's good for the society. It's good for everyone. Now, I believe that in Finland we agree on the big picture that I just described. On the other hand, I believe that when we go into details, that what is the appropriate level of legal protection against dismissals, what is the right level of unemployment benefits, what is the right duration, who's going to finance this re-education and so on. We probably do have some disagreements with our colleagues in trade unions, but I'll finish by saying that I'm very confident because we do have the common goal and a tradition of finding common answers, that we are going to find solutions in Finland and also in other Nordic countries, how to come to the best possible result. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Markus, for ending on that positive note. We, as always, we believe in collaboration, and maybe we have time later in the panel discussion as well, if you want to elaborate, if you have developed already any smart solutions in Finland in terms of incentivizing this upskilling or reskilling of staff and for companies to live through the change, etc. So that would be interesting to hear more from you a little bit later. All right, so now over to Annika Lytikainen, and you are the representative of the Nordic Youth Council. So now you heard from a trade union perspective and the industry perspective, but what about the youth perspective on the green transition? I guess we all believe that youth or young people do embrace accelerated change because otherwise we have no planet to live on, as was already stated. But what is your perspective if we make it a little bit more complex?
Yes, indeed, and thank you for interesting and important inputs so far. My name is Annika Lytikainen, and I'm the Vice President of the Nordic Youth Council, which maybe all of you didn't hear about before, but it's the forum for engaging youth in decision making in the Nordic Council, and it's actually a very integrated part. It was founded already 50 years ago and is nowadays a very integrated part in all cross-Nordic decision-making in the Nordic Council. So our representatives sit in all the committees and sessions and so on to bring a youth perspective on the decision-making. And so is, of course, the case with the environment and the sustainability issues as well. As we all know, the young generation is the one to live the longest with the decisions we either make or the effects of the decisions we either make or don't make. And as we know, young people have been, or a lot of young people have been very engaged with the climate issue for a long time. One could even say that the young generation was the one to bring up the big mainstream discussion about the green transition and climate changes. Many of us remember Greta Thunberg, for example. Also, efforts for combating climate change and for ensuring a green transition are needed for decades. So you need to keep us motivated and us believing in the future for having us do the work for the decades to come. And to ensure this motivation, this interest, this desire, one indeed needs to involve the young people in the decision making, and that's what our organization, for example, among very many others, and our member organizations are trying to do the best way possible in our everyday life. To kind of tie into the previous comments, I'd also like to lift up the education or the field of education. Nowadays, still, even though we know that the job market isn't like it was before, that you graduate into one profession and work there for 50 years and then leave office, and this trend will, as stated before, be sped up by the green transition and by the big changes in the working market. However, the field of education is not really there yet, we believe. We think all of the very good education system we have in the Nordics, and that the Nordics are so very well known of, should be modified to better fit into re-education and building up one's education later. Also to reduce this press of finding the right thing that will that even the job will exist after 50 years from graduating. Then Heta Elena from Finland mentioned this climate roundtable where they're quite revolutionary, include not only one but two youth representatives, and that's indeed a model we like very much, and that we are part of like different similar models on the cross-Nordic level. One thing we want to stress when talking about youth involvement and youth inclusion in decision making is, however, that that not only is it important to have that one or two young people around the table, but the one person can represent even more than one or two young persons if they have a mandate, and if that mandate bit is in order. So, for example, our organization, but many more organizations do the best they can to gather the voice of the young generation and thus talk with the mouths of sometimes thousands or tens of thousands members. Maybe last but not least, the main potential in the green transition, I think, is we talk about a lot about engaging youth in decision making overall, and at least in Finland, decreasing rates of, for instance, election participation by young people, due to the fact that the climate issue and the green transition has engaged so many young people. The best to come out from all this is, I think, from the youth perspective, that we get more young people engaged in decision making and in the democracy overall. But that being said, to round off, also a lot of young people either feel depressed about the climate issue, about the fact that we need to live with these things for the rest of our lives. So it's also one thing to stress is that it's also completely okay not to be a young person and not to be interested in the climate, or not to want to save the world every single moment in life, and that's something we probably keep forgetting about as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Annika. Very, very insightful, I think. And it's not about burdening the young population with this enormous responsibility, but really listening and make sure that you help us to come up with good and smart solutions, and where the education system is, of course, one key to a better future. All right, thank you so much. Now let's move on to the broader panel discussion and see if we have any questions. And as I mentioned before, you can post your questions in the Q&A function or window instead of the chat, as that is not functioning properly, unfortunately. So right now I see lots of faces on the screen here, so that's great. So now we have Heta-Elena with us again from the Ministry of Environment in Finland, and then we have Markus Eimele from Finnish Industries, we have Magnus Gisler again from the Nordic Trade Unions, and then Annika Lytikainen from the Nordic Youth Council. And then I also want to have Carlos Tapia, my colleague, join me here as well to see if there are any questions also related to the report. And I had prepared some questions for this debate, and of course you have already touched upon several of them in your statements and commentaries earlier. But a question that I posed at the very beginning of the program was, which are the blind spots of current climate policies in the Nordics when it comes to the just green transition? And maybe we could start again with Markus or Magnus, but from the labor market side, to just see, you were tapping into what could be done, but if you could say or give some examples of how would you, from your organizations, what would you like to add or do more to support a just green transition and address some of these blind spots, or how would you do that? I don't know, Markus, if you would like to start, for example.
Okay, thank you. I think we have already started focusing on this issue actually quite long time ago. I remember about 10 years ago, well, give or take, we were discussing with the Finnish trade unions about severance pay, what the payment when employees are made redundant, what kind of pay they should receive. And the result of the discussion was that it's actually not the best possible solution to give a sum of money to the employee. Also the trade unions leaders were agreed on this. It's better to direct that sum of money to upskilling, to re-education, so that instead of giving an employee, let's say, 5,000 euros or 10,000 euros cash, do whatever you want, it is put aside, and then kind of like, well, there are different systems. I'm not going to go into that, but the main point is that is used for the education, and I think that basic idea is sound still, and now the question is just how to develop that further. But I would say that is the best example in terms of labor market measures that we have taken during recent years. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Magnus, what would you say? Is that also from a union's perspective a good way to approach this, or do you have a different perspective on this? Or are there other blind spots that you from the trade union side would like to point out?
I can start off by saying that I think there is a lot of ground and a lot of challenges that we can agree between us from both the trade union side and the employer side. I totally agree with the view that Marcus said earlier on, that we can't slow the process down. I think we from the trade union side many times have been engaged to foster and to have as quick structure change as possible, because it's essential to get the good jobs, to get the new jobs forward. And we can't be left behind in the old working life. But the important thing, and here I think we could have a lot of discussion, and I think maybe some different views on how to solve things. But the important thing for us is that all this is done with as much social protection as possible, where we as employed people can feel as confident that we will, as the title for this discussion is, I will not be left behind. No one will be left behind. There is a social security system which enables me to have a fair economy if I get unemployed. It is a functioning unemployment system. There need to be in all jobs, in all sectors of the labor market, agreements between the social partners where we have a functional vocational training, reskilling, upskilling, lifelong learning, as we say, because then we all can be confident that it is possible to tackle the structure changes, even though if I end up in the situation where I don't have my work anymore. I think the challenge or the problem is when it leads to, as also what was one of Carlos' conclusions, when it leads to bigger inequalities, or when we don't have the same possibilities to tackle it. It's from the equality perspective, we need to focus on the blind spots, I think. And again, for us to solve it is to use the Nordic model and to develop the Nordic model, of course, in that perspective. So we also together in our conflict social partner built-in model that we have in the labor market can tackle this together. I think that is the only way forward, and it is also what have done the Nordics and the Nordic labor market so successful, that we have that possibility. So that is the way forward.
You have a good structure for collaboration. Maybe Annika, if you wanted to comment from a youth perspective, and since you also really touched upon this importance of the education system being adaptive, and also the ability to be able to reskill or come back and take an additional education. Have you seen in your Nordic network or collaboration, is there one or more Nordic countries that you think are front runners here? That we could all learn from, or is it a similar situation in most countries as you see it?
Yeah, that's a hard question. My own education background is in the university world, where I think the system still is very focused on getting her degrees and studying for a whole degree. However, more and more we see also this smaller modules that make it possible to kind of get more and new competencies. However, in the vocational training, we very much look at the Danish model with a lot of learning by doing in the training, which we see could be a good way for people in need of a vocational level training to more easily change jobs and learn on the new job. Something we however have been demanding for all of the education levels is to offer more also digital mobility within the education. It feels like something that should be there in 2022, but it's actually pretty hard if you want to take like just one or two courses or a smaller module from that is already digital, like for instance from a university in Stockholm or a vocational school in Oslo or whatever. That's very hard within the Nordics, and that's something we could do better together. And when creating this developing this education system, I think we should do it together and make it good and mobile, also digitally already from the very beginning.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and that would also be to utilize our Nordic resources even better, I think. It's too bad we don't have a Danish perspective or a Danish speaker with us right here, but we'll also keep that in mind. And then I'll actually turn to my colleague Nora here, who has picked up questions in the Q&A. So please, what do you see there?
Yes, so you've been very active in the Q&A. That is really good. Keep posting questions. There's a lot of them. Perhaps we can throw in some more later. I just picked two for now. We have one question that is perhaps good for Magnus and Markus. From Maja Liopta, she asks, what is the gender perspective in the green transition, and how are men and women affected differently by the green transitions? Perhaps you can reflect a little bit about that. And the second question comes from Cornelia Johansson, and perhaps we can direct that to Heta Elena. Cornelia wonders if there are already any examples of policy measures targeting the just transition. So are there already just transition policies that go a bit beyond the labor impact? We've talked about these vulnerable groups, and we know Finland is a front runner. Have you already put policies in place, for example, with respect to the target groups, older people, young people, or the other groups we talk about here? Is there already something we can share?
All right, those are two very good questions. So maybe we'll start with the gender perspective then. How do you address the gender perspective in your different efforts? Who wants to comment on that, Markus? Or Heta Elena, we'll turn to you first.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to take up that when we prepared the climate and energy midterm plan in Finland last year, we ordered a gender impact assessment about this document, and I think that was very enlightening. We have made a couple of gender impact assessments earlier in relation to climate midterm plans, so this was not the first one, but I think this was more extensive than it has been before. And I think there were very interesting outcomes. Just to touch a couple of them very shortly and briefly. The one thing that was identified is that there's more financial support for those green transition jobs that are related to male-dominant industries. And in the same time, for instance, in the service sector, that is usually more female-run industry sector, there's less policy measures that are supporting green transition. So this was one, and then the other one that I found very interesting is that in average, the consumption behavior of male is less climate friendly than with the female. But in the same time, the female in average felt that they don't have enough knowledge and capacity for climate action. So, and their self-identification in relation to climate action was lower than with the men. So I think all this kind of information is very useful when we are thinking of specific policy measures. And I think I really highly recommend this kind of impact assessment made by researchers. Thank you.
That is very, very interesting to hear. So before we go back to you about the policy question, let's hear from Marcus or Magnus as well, from your perspectives. How do you address the gender issues in different branches and because of different industries being hit or impacted in different ways of the green transition? Who wants to start? Magnus, maybe you want to comment on this. From your female members and male members, what kind of differences do you see and how do you address them?
Yes, thank you very much for an important question and area and an answer, hopefully for all members. This is one of the mainstream areas we have in the trade union movement. We always highlight jämställdhet, equality between women and men. So this is of course in the focus concerning also just transition. And I think it links to the questions about inequality, wage, what kind of conditions you have and so on. So you have that agenda as well into the just transition perspective. And I think it's quite easy that we get focus or that we think a lot about production industry where it, at least from a historical perspective, are more men employed than women. That is here the green transition starts, or it is here it has to be a change. And I think as well as you mentioned here, Helena, so we need to also focus concerning service sectors, concerning health care and so on. So in that perspective, it's also a gender equality question, I think. And I can come back to what you said, Carlos, that we need to make much more research concerning how the effects of climate policy is. And I think this is one of the main areas where we need to put a lot of effort and focus to see that we don't build barriers or make it more unjust from a gender perspective.
Thank you, and I'll put that question to Carlos soon. But first, maybe just hear briefly from you, Marcus, from the industry perspective. How do you take specific measures to address gender equality issues?
Well, first of all, I think I don't have much to add what Heta-Elena already told about the gender impact assessment. I believe that when we have those structural changes, the changes that happen in industry. I mean, in the big industrial plants, they also often involve a lot of employees. They get a lot of publicity, and they get a lot of attention, which means that special, how would I say, special measures are then directed to them. Whereas in service sector, it's kind of like more small companies there, and the changes there are more subtle, so to say, and that leads to a situation where actually the male-dominated industries or branches of industries get more attention, get more support than the female-dominated service sector. Now, what to do about it? I don't know. I mean, the legislation is basically gender neutral. So that's a good question, and I don't have a good answer, but I'll just have to keep on working on that. It is, of course, I totally agree, very important issue.
Carlos, maybe you could comment on how you will address the gender issue within the project, the NJUST project moving forward.
That's a very good question. Well, thank you all for these interesting issues and questions and comments. I think there's plenty of things that could be mentioned. But when it comes to the gender aspects, we will now explore, and then later my colleague Nora will tell us more about next steps in the project. But we will run a survey among the things that we will be doing. And there, in the survey, we will be including specific questions on these gender issues. But I would like to raise the concern or the issue, as Asta mentioned before, that we now need a bit more fine-grained analysis to be done. Because it's not about gender issues in general. It's about more specific aspects within sectors or climate policies that require attention from the gender perspective. And in order to produce that evidence, we need to look into more specific topics. We've been talking a lot today about labor market, with, of course, our super relevant, and the labor and effects of the climate transitions. But there is also other types of impacts that are channeled more through expenditure and cost of living, and the impacts that these energy policies are having on those issues. And then there's also another very good and interesting aspect to consider from the gender perspective, how different households, based on their composition, are consuming different types of goods, and how the increases on specific commodities might be impacting differently different types of households for that reason. So these are the kind of things we need to explore a bit more, trying to collect also the perceptions from the people, which is what really make policies actually be successful. If we don't enable this buy-in by the population in general, it's very difficult that policies can be successful. So we need to ensure that, and the better way to leave no one behind is to actually leave no one behind in this policy development stage, so that make sure that everyone is involved in these discussions.
It would be super interesting to follow the project as you move forward with this. But for now, maybe I should also just come back to this other question about if there are already examples of policies, climate mitigation policies that do address the justice perspective or just green transition. And Heta-Leena, maybe now is your time to say just a few more words about the new Climate Act in Finland. Have you specifically pointed this out somehow in the law, in the legislative text, or how have you done this?
Yes, indeed. We have in a couple of different ways. For the first time, there is now added this word justice inside of it. So it's a requirement from procedural side, but also from substantive side. Then when we do the climate action planning, we have different action plans there: adaptation, midterm plan, long-term plan, and land sector plan. And with each of these plans, we have to ensure, first of all, the participation during the process of preparing these plans. And we've been expanding it also how you should be able to be involved. In the past, the law only guaranteed the written format of participation, but now we broaden it up so that different groups could also participate in other formats, which is more modern way of participating. And then we also added specific procedural requirements for involving Sami Parliament and Sami people in preparing these plans. And also, as I told, we also established this new Sami Climate Council that is taking place from next year on. But also when we prepared the climate law, we did already wide participation. And for one new aspect that I have not touched yet is that we enabled online participation with 6 different languages. So we also had the online questionnaires in 3 different Sami languages, English, Swedish, and Finnish. And this is already guaranteeing some, practical side of participating with your own language, for instance. And also what we did when we prepared the law was that we made human rights assessment of the Climate Act. So we would identify the implications of the law for the current generations, but also for the future generations. So when you actually read the bill and the draft, you can see the impact assessment from human rights angle. And I think this is also very important when we talk about justice issues. So I think these were the main examples relating to the content of the reformed law. And now, of course, we have to apply it a lot. And I can already tell you that when we did the midterm climate action plan, there was a separate section for impact assessment on justice issues and on equality issues, including these gender aspects. And I think this, when we prepare this plan, I think it's very, very important to already identify different aspects. And we did the same with the energy and climate action plan. So there's also this justice impact assessment and human rights impact assessment, making it transparent that we already noticed that there are some implications with the climate policy measures. Some are positive, some are neutral, some might be negative. And if we identify that they're negative, then we have to take it very seriously and target these measures so that we can minimize all the negative impacts.
Sounds like a very ambitious plan and framework here. And for people who want to know more, I'm sure that they can contact you, or we could also, if you send us some more background material in English, maybe about this, we can also share this with the rest of the material from this program. So thanks again for telling us more about your work with the new Climate Act in Finland. Now, actually, we have more questions. So I will move on to Nora again, and loud and clear, tell us what's in the Q&A.
Yes, more questions are coming, so keep going with that. We have one follow-up question to Magnus and Markus. Lynn Brolin writes that it seems that we in the Nordic countries are in a quite good position to handle the green transition. But what do you see as the big risks or pitfalls from your perspective here in the Nordics? Could it be structural issues, a risk for political pushback from certain groups? What do you see as sort of potential risks on the horizon? And then perhaps one question that Annika could help us answer. We have a question here about if there are any Nordic networks that work together on the green transition and that would combine different types of actors, for example, governments, civil society, social partners. I was wondering if perhaps you could say a few words. You from the Nordic Youth Council, are you involved in any other such broader networks that deal with the green transition?
Good question. Let's start with you, Annika. What would you say? Are you, the youth movement, also connected to other networks and working specifically with the green transition?
To some extent, yes. And then, of course, we ourselves and our member organizations, as well as the national youth councils, have some changing seats in some, such as, for instance, the Finnish roundtable that Heta-Elena mentioned. in some more short-term organs, but we could do more, and we'd like to do more. It's not completely related to green transition, but then again, everything's related. We, for instance, have a seat in the Nordic biodiversity network that do include quite a lot of different actors, but I think we'd for sure need more of this kind of networking on the green transition.
Maybe before we continue, also if you wanted to comment on the gender aspect, do you see a tilt towards more young men or more young women being engaged in the topic of green transition, or is it a good gender equality in the engagement or voice of young people here?
Like completely based on my own feelings and no facts, the people I see and I know, and the activists I see and know, and so on. I'd say it's like very women heavy, but then again about the working market, like the biggest needs, like the biggest emissions come from the building industry and the traffic industry, and they are very male heavy industries. So indeed, I think men will statistically said be more affected on the working market and so on.
This is interesting, and maybe this also points to the importance of reaching out to youth via schools, where everyone is actually present regardless of gender. Thanks, that's good to know. So maybe again then, Magnus and Marcus, where are or what are the biggest risks as you see it with the green transition from a Nordic perspective? Or you seem very hopeful. You think you're going to make this, but what would be the biggest stumbling blocks?
Well, if I start now. I think the biggest challenge is to find the right balance. I totally agree with Magnus when he said that the system has to be acceptable by employees, by maybe the public in general. When we know that change is coming, you have to have the enough security to not to resist the change too much. On the other hand, from the employer's side, it must not be kind of like it can't go too far. It has to have the right incentive for the employees to reskill, upskill, and so on. So that's kind of like one area for balance. Another area of balance is that we have different kind of collective agreements, I think, in all Nordic countries, meaning that different collective agreements in different branches, and also these like social measures, social protection is also partly in the collective agreements. So what we must do, I'm talking about, for example, my organization as a central organization, is to again find the balance, right balance that all branches give in their collective agreements enough social protection. So those are the two things, and the combining word is balance. If we don't find if we don't find the balance, then we are in trouble.
Balance is a good word, I think, as well. Magnus, what do you say? Are you also working to find this right balance?
Yeah, I think you can say that that is one of the strengths with a Nordic model. It's the balance that you need to find solutions. You need to make compromises. You have to work together. So balance is, of course, a key in this. But it also is important to underline that it also needs to build into this balance the right social security, so people don't feel insecure or structure change. that is also an important part of the balance. But I also think from a joint Nordic perspective, one of the really big challenges that we need to tackle is that if we don't have the driving force to make the structure change, we in the Nordics altogether will be left behind. We will not be able to develop our competitiveness and our strength to have small economies, but be very successful at the enterprise level in exporting and so on, because our whole social model with social welfare also builds on the fact that we are successful and competitiveness in a global perspective and in the competitiveness that we see from the global perspective. So I think that is also a balance to have the driving force in the structure change for a just green transition, but also to do it in a decent and acceptable way so people are not left behind and feel that they are secure and there is a social security and as little insecurity as possible.
But if you then reverse that, considering the collaboration model that we already have in the Nordic countries, then we might also have a great potential then to actually succeed in accelerating change in a way that can be accepted. I think that's what I hear also from all of you here. Maybe also a final comment from Heta-Lena here, from a Finnish perspective, where do you see the biggest potential in the green transition? I mean, this is a huge question, of course, but if you have summarized this somehow also in your work with the Climate Act.
Well, I think the biggest potential is that often when we do climate action, we also actually solve some other problems in the same time. So let me give you just very concrete examples that, for instance, people have health-related problems because of the nutrition is not healthy enough. But actually, when you look at the climate-friendly diet, and the researchers have now assessed it quite a bit, that actually the planetary, the food for which is good for planet is also good for the health, and we can tackle two of these kind of things in the same time. We know that for example, small children might not be doing enough physical activity, and in the same time, when we look at what is climate friendly way of moving is walking, bicycle riding, and all of these kind of things. And again, we can, if we start to tackle these in the same time, we might increase the health of the population, and even, for example, among the children, but also other age groups, when we just make the infrastructure so that it will support this kind of healthy lifestyle. So I think this can also motivate people. In the same time, might be that some of these climate solutions that we make create financial savings for the people. And now when we look, for instance, the energy efficiency things and so on, we can directly also see that those people who have been making these energy efficiency measures before are now in a better position when the energy prices are going up. So in many ways, I think we can see these at least two or different problems are solved in the same time when we do climate actions. And I think this is something promising for the whole society.
Healthy people, healthy planet. I think that's a good thing to wrap up around. Maybe, I don't know, Annika, from the youth perspective, if I give the final word to you, what do you and your youth movement or the Youth Council, what would you say is the biggest potential with the green transition, besides, of course, surviving on this planet, which is a given, but besides that, if you have any more concrete example here?
I'd like to mention again the thing I mentioned before, that whereas people are very worried about the low participation rates of young people in elections and voting rates and so on, the climate change has made a lot of young people raise their voices in the climate issue, and hopefully it will also spread out to all the other sectors in our democracy and in our society to make the same people and hopefully even more people active also on other fields in the society.
That sounds promising to me. So very good. Thank you so much for your participation here and all your insightful comments and thoughts, and also all the things, the concrete measures that you have been mentioning here today. As we move on with the program, I will now actually, and also thank you, Carlos, of course, I'll actually welcome another project member and colleague, Nora Sanchez-Gasson. You're also Senior Research Fellow here at Regio and happen to be involved in a few other projects on very related topics. So yeah, just tell us some more. What else is going on?
Exactly. Hello, everyone, also from me. My name is Nora Sanchez-Gasson, also working here at Regio and a member of the NJUST team. And before we wrap up this really interesting seminar, I just wanted to take the opportunity to point you to some other research projects that we do here at Regio, because the green transition is a very big topic at the moment at Regio. We have several projects that in one or other way deal with this topic, and we have put together all the information on a website that you can see here, nordregio.org/green-transition. So you can go there if you want to see what else is going on at Regio that deals with the green transition in different angles. And I just want to highlight 3 projects to you as examples. There we have, for example, the so-called ENIC project. ENIC stands for a rather long title, Ensuring Inclusive Economic Growth in the Transition to a Green Economy. So in this project, we also look at the green transition. We also look at questions of social inequality, but perhaps we take a bit more of an economic or financial angle in comparison to NJUST. Some questions we like to answer in that project include, for example, how climate policies affect household income and consumption in the Nordic countries. We also look at how Nordic regions in our countries are affected by the green transition in an economic way. So also some very interesting questions that we try to answer there. A second project I wanted to point out to you has the title A Just Green Transition in Rural Areas. And as the title says here, we zoom in on the rural areas. We know that rural areas in the Nordics are important enablers in the green transition because they have so many of the natural resources. But in this second project, we try to find out also how can we make sure that the rural areas don't just remain enablers of the green transitions, but actually that this is an opportunity for them that brings real added value. So how can we make that happen, that the green transition is an opportunity and big chance for the rural areas? And the third project, just to mention briefly to you, is called Local Ownership and Transitions Towards Sustainable Energy Systems. This is a Swedish project where we look at local ownership of energy systems, how this can be promoted, how this can be supported, and how local ownership of energy production can also help us in the sustainability of our energy provision. So these are just 3 ongoing projects. I can also say that we have more projects already in the pipeline. For example, a big European project, a Horizon project that deals with how you can engage the public in the green transition. So lots of more interesting material to come. And if you're interested, if you want to know more, have a look at our website, and there you can find all the relevant materials.
Thank you, Nora. And as you understand, there are many angles to research on this very broad topic, and the local and regional development perspective is, of course, always interesting for us at Regio. So with those words, let's welcome Anna Lundgren back on stage, the project manager for NJUST, which is the project that has now produced these reports that we presented today. So maybe just tell us a bit more about the next steps in our project, in this project.
Absolutely. Thank you, Åsa. And thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for all these insightful comments that we've had during this afternoon. And just to pick up on a few things that I picked up this afternoon, I'm glad to hear that you also pointed out the knowledge gaps that we have found in our 2 reports. We present in the 2 reports the knowledge we've found so far, but we also see that there is need for more data, there is need for more knowledge, and we look forward to be able to contribute with that. So that is one point I would like to point out. And then I also heard several of you talking about these asymmetric impacts, how different groups are affected differently by the impacts of climate policies. And to learn more about this will be necessary. And that is also something we're going to do in the next steps of the project. As Carlos mentioned, we will do a survey on perceptions of the green transition and of climate change. And we will also dive into focus groups where we will go more into depth with those target groups that we have selected for the project to learn more about how they perceive the green transition and how they perceive climate policies. And in the end, as was mentioned before, we will come up with some kind of a toolbox for a just green transition. How can we achieve a just green transition? And how can we contribute with measures, with tools, with instruments that can help policymakers deal with the green transition? And a third thing I heard or picked up on from the discussion was this cross-sectoral issues that we're dealing with here. It is both cross-sectoral policies, it's both across different policy areas, and it is also across stakeholders, and how we need to find that balance to preserve the social security while also preserving the competitiveness that we have in the Nordic region. And perhaps it's time to talk about how the Nordic model can actually turn green, how we can involve these elements of the green transition into the Nordic model. Perhaps that is a future step to go. As Nora said, if you're interested to learn more, have a look at our website, but also already now mark in your calendars, we will have another similar seminar coming up in August next year, where we present the next results of the project. Of course, as we go along in the projects, we will have results and we will present them on our website, but to summarize the results, we will come back in August 2023. So thank you all for your participation, and I'll leave it back to you, Åsa.
Thank you, Anna. And yes, as Anna said here, the project will go on for several years because it will be an inclusive process, and we will also really dig deeper into things like the Finnish climate law, etc. To when we start working on the policy toolbox here to make sure that it's useful. And we also do welcome you to get in touch, and we'll share contact information as well tomorrow, when we also share the recording from this event, the presentations, and also the reports, of course, which are already available on our website, nordregio.org. One final thing I wanted to mention as well is that we actually have our annual Nordregio Forum coming up already before August of next year, and that is already now in November. 23rd, 24th November, we'll meet in Hamar in Norway, just a very quick train ride from the Gardermoen airport, and there we'll dig deeper into very related topics. So the headline for this year is to adapt or to transform changing labor markets and greener communities. Might as well be that some of our speakers today might show up there as well, and hopefully some of you in the audience might find this interesting. And this is our annual meeting place for sustainable regional development for all of you who work with these topics. So everyone's very welcome. We're going to start sending out invitations in a week or so, and we're very happy to have you also now on our email list here, so we can also keep you updated with the developments in the NJUST project. All right, with that, we're approaching 4 o'clock, and I also want to reach out again to all our speakers today who've taken their time to participate and share all their knowledge, and also big thanks to the big audience who followed the event today and for contributing with questions and comments. And we really sorry that the chat function didn't work. But anyway, have a lovely rest of the day, and we will be back with more events and we'll let you know about it. Have a good day. Bye.